opposing gloves here, and we're going to really quick talk about the parts of drum and bass, and then we're going to move on to making some tracks, finally get to the, the production part, making some stuff. So I just really quick want to lay it out. So generally there's this thing called rhythm and drum and bass. You've already seen it. It's everywhere. It generally revolves around it. And generally, I keep saying generally, like there's a general here or something. You want to revolve things around where the rhythm is, because you're basing most things is drums and bass. So there's going to be some drums, there's going to be some bass, and the rhythm is the main, like how they interact will often, say whether or not it jives, whether or not it works. So, okay. So we have the general rhythm is, this do-da, do-da. So we have a kick on 1, snare on 2, kick on the beat of 3, the and of 3, and then a snare on 4. Sounds like this. Of course, it's like fast. And then everything else is sort of a variation on that idea where you add additional things. It's all to serve the emphasis of this point. There are breaks that don't have stuff like this, and sometimes the drums are written to fit with the melody. But ideally, you have some sort of a rhythm, and it goes like that. We're going to be dealing more about this. You'll just see it in action. We aren't necessarily going to talk about it as a topic. But you should just be aware that that's like the rhythm. You get creative with that rhythm. This is the basis. If it's a basic, that means that it can get really, really, really freaking deep. If you can't get really freaking deep from there, then it's not a basic concept. This is a basic concept. Like there's like too much to talk about with things you could do to embellish and do things with this. So that's the first part, is the rhythm. The second part is the drums. You've already sort of talked about picking out samples and layering together to make a beat, to make a song, to make a track, to how do you pick what samples you pick. We've talked about that a little bit. A lot of it's just picking things that'll work texturally with what you want to do, and that serve to emphasize whatever points you want in your track. So the drum sampling, picking out, it's just, you got an ear, use it. Then that pretty much goes for everything. We have our bass. There's two kinds of bass. There's sub bass, and then there's melodic bass. Sub bass is like the, this thing. In case I have, just go look up sound design with on I think any series that's sound design with, the first one should be a sub bass. At least it is at this point in time. FM8, Citrus, and Harmer, I know, have those. So you have sub bass, and then what you'll do, some cool things with the way the bass fits into it, is you have two kinds of bass. You have the sub bass and you have melodic content bass. And what people will sometimes do, instead of using just a blank tone like this as your sub, that's just like your general sub. Here, you could come in here and find maybe a cool different sound. Let's see, do they have flutes and stuff in here? Short sequence. Here we go, string. And whoa. They'll use things like that as a sub instead. So they'll embellish their sub a little bit with elements that can be sort of rhythmic and create interest, or they'll use sort of unusual things that wouldn't usually be subs, but they use them as subs, and they'll filter out the top end and do lots of cool stuff. You'll see that as we go into it, maybe if I delve into it as an idea. If not, I've mentioned it here. You could go through, just find cool presets and then just filter them down to where only the sub and a couple of harmonics exist and all the modulation is still there. You'd be surprised how cool some things can sound. Another on the bass, anything that's sort of melodic, like any sort of rip, anything that's not a sub is considered part of the bass. And then of course you have the melody and the bright stuff, the timbres, the things that are clearly not bass but are melody. Those things I don't really need to explain the role in a track. Like, it's usually pretty self-evident. They serve to just push things forward. There's a couple subtypes of those though. So there's our melodic stuff that sort of our attention gets drawn to that. And then there is the textural stuff in the background that are called pads. Pads are anything that's noise, any sort of effects that are long drones. I count those all as pads. They are padding your track. So like, for example, Black Octopus has a bunch of neat things in their Leviathan pack. And I'll go in, I'll put a whole bunch in, and then I'll layer them and bring the volume up dynamically and maybe do additional processing to them. And then anything that is atmospheric in nature that serves to create mood, but does not, it does not create, let's see here. It's not a pad, but it serves to create the mood. That to me is just aesthetics. So when you accomplish aesthetics, that's like when you create a mood via something that's not a pad. Sometimes those can be useful. Any sort of clicks, pops, unusual bell sounds that are not really melodic in nature, just mood wise, those things would be considered, to me, aesthetics. That's what I call them, aesthetics. Now I don't think there's two other things on here, but they're sort of enormous topics that I'm probably not going to address in the series. You'll just see them in action. That is the mixing. Mixing is specific to whatever it is you're doing. There's like literally no guide to really how to mix in particular. Generally, when you mix, what you do, so there's two types of mixing. There's creative mixing, which is what you're doing while you're going, and it's generally coupled with mastering. Mastering, let's talk about mastering first. It's actually a little bit easier in some ways. Mastering is when you get rid of the headroom in your track. Not necessarily crush everything, you just take all the headroom out. So you essentially normalize your track. Because there's no reason to have it any softer. And then there's a further step. Some people go after a feel, and those are the people who kind of really care about their music. And then there are the people who just crush the living snot out of their music and just make it as loud as friggin' possible and compromise parts of their music for the loudness. So they'll say it's, market ready, competition. This is usually done by musicians who don't know what the junk they're doing, or it fits into the style, whatever it is they're doing. So I've seen criticism videos where like bigger artists will tell younger artists, what's going on, like about their mix, and they'll like criticize them over having headroom in their mix, and they still peak though. So I'm just like, what the junk is wrong with you, dude? You have a friggin' volume knob. Turn your volume knob up. They have it the way they want it. Like, the idea is you want to standardize it so you don't have to turn your volume knob. That's one idea behind mastering, but it's honestly, you could kill parts of your mix. And so this idea of getting rid of all the headroom, which headroom is basically if your mix is peaking, so the loudest part, that's the peak, is at like 6 dB full scale, negative 6 dB full scale, then that's like it. And then you get rid of the headroom, which is all the space you have between your peaking and then the full scale you actually can have. I have things in digital audio series about this. It's just an enormous topic it's like mastering principles apply across all genres. They're just sort of applied differently depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. So in drum and bass, generally you do kind of want to crush it a little bit. But yeah, I just want to say that like it's been like this is one of those things that people go crazy on, and they think that they have some sort of like law about how to go about doing it. Like, oh, you left headroom in your mix, you're a moron type deal. That's not true. Like if you leave headroom in your mix, good for friggin' you, man. Like, people go crazy these days. So that's one. And then so you can go for the mood. Essentially, you just want to make it as convenient as possible for the listener and make it sound as good on as many devices as possible. It's another goal. But generally, a mix down will fix a lot of these things. What's the mix down? Well, the mix down is, so there's two kinds. And I sort of switch on and off. I've experimented with both. One is you mix as you're going and you're creating. This isn't when you're recording, it's different because they're not making every element as they go along in the same way that we do, where we're giving all this attention and adding all these effects all at the same time in the moment that we're making it. They sort of they record their track, and then you deal with all this stuff after you've recorded them. Of course, there's a lot of pseudo work styles out there. I'm not saying like that's how it always happens, but there's sort of two general classes, and people who work in one usually don't know about the other very much. You generally specialize in one, and that's your boss. So when we're going, you could do that. And then the mix down session, you want to be careful. Sometimes I'll monitor at higher levels, and then I'll turn all my faders down to like negative 9 dB, and it's dB full scale. So I have plenty of volume. Don't even talk about this technical crap. Like, oh no, you're going to get like noise when you turn it up. Then you just don't know about digital audio like at all. Like friggin' go read some digital audio books that are recent. So there's no problem with going down to -9. 6 is like the stereotypical dogmatic answer, like, oh yeah, do 6, la la la. But you have so much extra headroom, especially when you do color dithering at the very end to sort of do your track. Like you'll have plenty of headroom. Don't even worry about it. About noise being added into your stuff, unless you're working with audio clips. Then it sort of changes the game a little bit. But from other recordings, but even then, it's still not too big of an issue. So don't even worry about it. If you're working with poor quality audio clips, then you just have to doctor your clips or do something. So then you may consider to choose 6 or whatever. But as you see, these topics are like freaking, like I could talk forever about just the smallest things about decisions you make. So I choose 9. You may choose 6. It just depends. If you got clean recordings, 9 is perfectly fine. Okay, and then so that's one way is you mix as you go and you monitor high. Sometimes I just leave my faders here. The thing about it is this is an arbitrary position because we're using dB full scale. Go watch my digital audio series if you want to know more about some of these issues. But these are just arbitrary positions. So just pick where they're going to be. You will notice that I will use, because I'm recording at the same time that I'm doing some of this stuff, I'm going to leave them at nominal probably, simply because now what's the issue with that? Like, why would you want to go lower? Well, if I don't want to be clipping or hitting my limiter at its threshold, which is something I don't want to do, then I will turn down everything, and then I could turn stuff up. Like if I want my kick to be a dB louder to fit in the mix better, I can do that with no problem. If my kick's already as loud as it is, I'm gonna have to turn everything else down, and that's way more complicated and way less intuitive, and there's just a number of issues. So generally you're gonna want to turn stuff down and then turn it up as you go. That's why you do it. And you mix to a level, that way later on, once you've got your mix the perfect way you want it to be, you have all this headroom at the mastering stage, and then you just turn everything up. If you mix and master at the same time, that's great, but you're going to accomplish very different results, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's sort of an unorthodox approach to the whole process. It's more of a new one, and a lot of new people who are like, I do it at the same time, and they like say it like they're so proud, and I'm like, yeah, and you also don't know jack about what you're doing probably. Like, you just don't, because you're saying it like that. Like people, that's you accomplish, your mixes are almost always muddier when you do it that way. And sometimes it doesn't matter because of the genre or the compression you're doing, because you all further don't know what you're doing on other sides of things, which, you know, is fine. You're being an artist, and it's sort of become, because of this, it's sort of become a thing with genres like this. But you know, just be careful with what you're doing out there, guys. Like these subjects run deep. There are books written on the subject. One day I'll probably have a course on, you know, general guidelines, principles about how things work, how they're looked at, perspectives, not necessarily like a rule book, but just because you can't really have rules for this stuff. It's all an opinion. You know what I'm saying? So hopefully that puts some things in perspective. I know this is just sort of a talking video, but this is just like the parts of drum and bass when you're going about it, some different methods of going about it. So again, 2 mixing techniques. One's you mix as you go, and the other one is you have a separate mix down phase where you turn, I didn't talk about this. You turn everything down and then you mix it up to a level. That's like the way I feel like when I do that, I get the mix that I really want, but then my mastering becomes way more complicated, because then you have your mix you want and you got to like compromise with, it tears your heart out sometimes to do that. And then you get to the mastering, and the mastering happens as is. One is you go for like maximum loudness. One is you go for feel, you know, what kind of audience are you going for? And keep in mind, people have volume knobs, they can use them, but you don't want to make it unnecessarily complicated. Like, oh, I got to turn this way up for this one track and then down. You're going to be a very unpopular person as soon as like someone has like their ears blown out from the difference in loudness between a previous track and the next. And there's this thing called the equal loudness contour, which louder stuff we naturally perceive it as better. And it's a big fight in the mix down too, to be aware of this. So one day I'll also have a critical listening series, but for now that's what I got. So we're gonna be looking, most of the series is gonna be about this stuff, the mixing and mastering and stuff. It's like this whole philosophical thing all on its own that I don't really want to approach really, because it's complicated, and I feel like people will start arguing in the comments about how to go about things, and I just don't want to see name calling and stuff and ignorant opinions. When people post ignorant stuff, I try to be as nice as possible, because I realize they just don't know, especially if they're being rude about it. Generally they're trying to conceal that like they don't know something. Like when they're being mean about it, like, oh, I'm so much better than you or whatever, just keep in mind that just generally means they are insecure about something that they are doing. So just chill out and relax. Like, don't eat them alive, guys. Just be nice. Just be like, whatever. Don't say anything to them. I try to do that every now and then. You know, I'm not perfect either, so I get mad because I'm like, I have insecurities in some stuff that I do. Like everyone does. Like, you just can't escape it. Okay. So just get used to life, I guess, a little bit. But anyways, that's that. If you have any questions about this, let me know. I hope that you found this video useful and informative. Hopefully gave you some ideas. The main point of some of these videos and why I've waited so long before I start working on tracks is because for you people who are new to producing, you might be missing a lot of these concepts. You may not even have an idea of how big some of these concepts are. Like, I barely have even brushed mastering or anything, and I have an entire series devoted to just specific parts and aspects of it. Like, digital audio is a big part of mastering, and we aren't even dealing with analog gear. Like, it gets so big. I'm literally going to school for some of these things. So, you know, keep in mind, we're not going to be talking about mics. There's just so much other secondary information. So yes, if you have any questions, let me know. You know, keep them reasonable though. And you know, people who also watch these videos that feel like they do have this information, you know, help me out in the comments. Like, I'm not like the end all authority on this. In some ways, I'm still learning just the same as anyone else is learning. Like, I don't claim to be like the expert. I'm just a guy having fun producing. Subscribe and have a blessed day. Make it burn them. You know, the one where they light people on fire? Just kidding. I haven't really paid attention to the music video. But anyways, we're going to make the Bernie bass. Not the political one, the Bernie bass. So, okay. So here is the original. And here's what I got. That's the second attempt, actually. Here's